Eamon Scanlon, you are a sitting TD in government TD. What went wrong?
When we think back, we had a 6 billion surplus in 2006, and 4 years later we have a 20 billion shortfall. My God, it's hard to explain, quite honestly. I think the regulation is easy. It's easy to blame everybody. I suppose the government of the day should have been watching what was happening. I think.
But why weren't you watching? You were in government. You were the government, Eamon.
Yes, I'm a TD for 3.5 years. In fairness, this situation has developed over a long number of years. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. This situation has developed, I think, over a long number of years. I know that, listen to Micheál Martin recently, where he said, I suppose we were, in fairness, a lot of money has been spent over the years, and a lot of it to good use as well. If we look at Sligo here at the moment, Sligo IT, and I see the representatives here from the college here tonight, the amounts of money that's been invested in Sligo, it could be in the region of 100 million, I'd say, in the last 7 or 8 years. There was monies well spent, but unfortunately I think that we spent more certainly than we were taking in. Taxes were reduced, expenditure was increased, and I think now we find ourselves in a very serious situation. And it's not just Ireland either. This is a problem worldwide.
John Perry, would you agree with anything he was saying there?
It's just on that what went wrong. It's very easy to know what went wrong because I chaired the public accounts in 2004 for 2.5 years, and there was I worked very closely with the Controller and Auditor General John Purcell, and there was a scandal a week. Every week there was and at the end of the year in his report there was a consistent report given to the government of overspend, mismanagement, lack of accountability, 1 million a week being spent on consultants, publishing reports that were rarely if ever read. So that this did not happen overnight. This recession is going back to in the 2007 general election, when Brian Cowan came to the rescue and said that he was a safe pair of hands, that the whole building boom. And you must remember the incentivization given by government. For every 100 million that was given out by a bank, the government got back 40 million. It was the biggest con job of all times. When you go into every village and every town, you see the incentivization given. We have 900 hotels when 400 would be adequate. We have 13 times more retail area than would be actually essential in this economy. So really, in one sense, it was propelled by tax incentivizations that really propelled the massive downturn in the economy. You go to every village and every town, and there's houses and houses, estates, ghost estates. It was bad management, and the Controller and Auditor General in 2004, 2005, 2006 had a clear marker in reports down which were completely ignored by government.
There are many reasons for failure, but there are no excuses. As far as I'm concerned, there's been systemic failure in politics. That's why there's a need for new politics. The level of autopilot which existed, particularly from 2002, is unacceptable. What in my view needs to take place is an entire root and branch reform, not just of the size of the Dáil or the costs of running it, though both are important. What is also radically needed and very urgently needed is that there is reform in how the business is done. We need full-time ministers focused on flying that plane manually, not on autopilot. And in that context, for example, they need to take control of answering questions and taking decisions themselves. For example, when cancer services are taking over here, I don't want to hear from the Minister of the day saying that is an issue for the HSE. For the system started to go wrong when we started to subcontract the power and the running of the country to third-party organisations who were responsible to nobody, answerable to nobody, and in control, the HSE, of 16 billion of your money. That is what needs to change.
Chairman, I think it is worth before we. I think it is worth before we get into too much slagging matches that we actually do analyse the situation. Excuse me, yeah, Chair. Through the Chair. There are three words, I think, why we have ended up where we are. light touch regulation. Long before the discussion about surrendering our sovereignty came about in recent months and the last couple of years, we actually gave our sovereignty away a long time ago. And when we set up the Financial Services Centre in Dublin in 1987, we set up a system where we started to set up essentially a tax haven, where literally billions and billions of other people's money was slushing through. And when a report was done at the end of the 1990s recommending that we deal with the regulation issue, Bertie Ahern, Ms. Taoiseach at the time, said no. We would be compromising what we have in the Financial Services Centre. And the Irish banks who have bankrupted our state were actually operating on the back of that light touch regulation. So before we really get heated here, let's analyse when we started to give our sovereignty away. Essentially, our state was captive to capital.
Tony, you wanted to say something here to that?
I'd just like to say, Chairman, that just listening here, and I'm sure the audience as well, people would think that Fianna Fáil weren't in power for the last 14 years. First of all, because I'm listening for the last number of months. First of all, this country is bankrupt. The government had to bring the IMF into this country. And Fianna Fáil and their representatives must have known and do know what happened over the last 14 years. And particularly during the boom time, the reckless spending that went on in this country over those years. And there was no accountability whatsoever. And the amount of problems that have now been created in relation to no jobs for our young people, the amount of immigration at perhaps maybe 1,000 a week, the amount of people that are in dire straits because of taking out mortgages, now in negative equity. And I think that, Chairman, that we must...
Tony, no, that's fine. Look, we've covered a lot of that in the speech, and Susan, I'd like to hear from yourself on that now.
It wasn't just light touch regulation. Surely it was about the vested interests. Surely it was about the people playing rounds of golf. And when you keep giving out work to your friends and looking after your friends instead of your constituents, instead of the citizens of this country, you reach the meltdown that we have come to. And I remember...
I'm sorry, the question was, how did we get to where we are? It's very simple how we got to where we are. The Fianna Fáil government put policies in place in relation to development. They could not have been implemented without councillors throughout this country from all parties putting up their hands in council chambers and voting on behalf of vested interest to zone land throughout this country. So no party here is not culpable in what has happened to this country. And every single party will have to face the shame of putting my children and your children's future in jeopardy because of the decisions they made on behalf of vested interests. We cannot just point one finger, we point it at them all.
Okay. Yes,
I would actually agree with comments made by Alwyn, because essentially what has been happening is that Fianna Fáil have looked after those who looked after them over the years, those who visited the Galway tent, the speculators, the developers, the bankers. They were given free rein. And of course, Alwyn is right. Throughout the length and breadth of this country, rezonings after rezonings after rezonings. And not only Fianna Fáil, but to a large extent, many Fine Gael councillors voting for those rezonings. And a total lack of accountability. When people got up, whether at local authority level, at council level, or at national level, and asked awkward questions, they were described as being anti-development. That's the reality. We had that year after year over the last decade. Now we are paying the price, and the people of this country are paying the price. And I believe, Chair, that there can be no justification, moral or otherwise, for the people of Ireland to pay for the reckless gambling of bondholders, bankers and developers. Absolutely out of the question.
You were a councillor at the very end there, Brian, Colleen. Would you agree with the sentiment of Alwyn there?
Well, what I've seen in my time in the council is Fianna Fáil brought in policies of high density housing into villages, into rural areas.
These are all ghost estates now.
They're ghost estates now, and there's actually planning permission out there for another 56,000 houses.
Where in Sligo?
In the whole country. There's a review done of it. But I mean, that's a fact. I mean, the whole thing was structured around the buddy system, the golden circle. There were people that I'm on yours board, you're on mine. It was a nice, like today when the bankers came into Brian Cowan's house, he opened the friend. He said, "Come in, buddy. How was the golf going? Did you go out for a meal recently?" It was not a formal meeting. It was friends he met at the door who came into his house and said, "Look, we're in trouble." He said, "Oh, sure, I know ye well. What do ye want?" And they said, "Oh, the banks are going into ruin." He said, "Certainly, I give you a guarantee. No strings attached. The strings are us. We have to pay for it now. We're the people that we're the strings. We're the ones that are paying for these fellas that had a party and are still at it, giving themselves €200,000 of a bonus, and the country in ruins. It's not on. It's not right."
Michael Clark, you were Fianna Fáil and now independent. You were Fianna Fáil, weren't you?
Well, I was Fianna Fáil when Fianna Fáil was Fianna Fáil, but Fianna Fáil is no longer Fianna Fáil. There's IMF now.
Can you repeat that?
Do you agree with Alan?
Well, I certainly do. I think that I'm only a councillor 2 years and there was huge mistakes made in the past, and we haven't learned from those past because the checks and balances that we need in the banking system isn't put in place even yet, because we need an independent health inspector system in the banking services. You see, the regulators themselves, the regulator walked away with 400,000 or 300,000 of a golden handshake as well, when the man should be up on charges.
There is a regulator there now. Yes.
The last one.
He's doing his job.
Yeah, he did not do. This man is there doing his job, but the man before that didn't do his job. And
in relation to why we're here, where we are as Fianna Fáil tend to put it, we are where we are. Let's look forward. We are where we are basically because of bad political choices. I would say the rot set in long before the last general election. I do think that Fianna Fáil in particular, but to some extent Fine Gael and Labour also, deceived the electorate into thinking that the future was fairly good, the economy was sound, and that if anything we'd have a soft landing. The same happened in the Lisbon Treaty. Vote for jobs, vote for progress, vote for Lisbon, twice. Sinn Féin, it has to be acknowledged, we stood up and we said, this economy is going to hell in a basket case. It's going to crash land. There's an over-dependence on the building industry, and the banks are lending recklessly. And that great self-proclaimed socialist of his time, Bertie Ahern, called us economic basket cases. Who were the economic basket cases then, and who are the economic basket cases now? And where do we result because of those economic experts?
Okay, Dick.
Well, what's bothering me is that all the parties at this table did their apprenticeships inside the council chamber. And what's the first thing we hear every year is the competition, the pact. Now, what the hell is that about? That is about, right lads, we'll support one another now for the expenses and such like. You know. Now, I didn't hear anybody talking about the Dáil chamber being decontaminated. And I think it needs decontamination. And in fact, some of the people in there are badly in need of consignment to the rubbish tip, because they have left us where we won't be able ever again in my lifetime, which is short. Pardon?
Are you talking about anybody in particular?
Well, as it happens, my big worry is, Fianna Fáil did it this time. Who the hell is going to do it the next time? Do you think it won't happen? How are we going to supervise it?
Well, I think that over the last number of decades there has been a culture of greed that has set into this country, a culture of political eliteness, that they could do whatever, whenever they wanted to, and it didn't matter what anyone else thought. To say that people didn't put their hands up and say that there's too much development is wrong. I spoke up on a number of occasions many years ago in relation to development and overdevelopment and non-sustainable development, and was told that I was anti-development. So people did stand up. I hope this audience and throughout the country will remember those people that did stand up and say it and say stop. And there was lots of mistakes, and I'll finish on this. There's many mistakes were made with big business, banks and politicians, but the greatest mistake that was made is when our government parties, the party system, agreed to put the debt onto you and your children and put our kids into economic slavery for generations. That's the biggest criminal